Buenos Aires, Argentina. A night that seemed ordinary. The sky was covered in a dull gray, low and heavy. A light wind moved through the trees along the road, carrying damp air that signaled a storm forming somewhere in the distance. The city itself appeared to slow down, as if it, too, were holding its breath, waiting for something about to happen. Along the edge of a narrow street, two cars were parked about 30 meters apart. No lights. No sound. They had been there long enough to blend into the surroundings, but not long enough to draw attention. Inside those cars were 7 men. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. Their eyes were fixed on the same place. A small, aging bus stop, its pale yellow light spilling onto the cracked pavement below. To anyone else, it was just an anonymous stop, a place where people waited after a long day of work. But to them, it was the center of the world. They had waited for this moment for years. Each of them carried a story. Memories that never faded. Families erased, names reduced to cold lists. Some had lost parents. Some had lost brothers and sisters. Some had grown up with an absence that could never be filled. All of it had led them here. A dark street in Buenos Aires. An ordinary bus stop, and a bus marked with the number 203. According to the information they had, that bus would bring a man home after work. A man who lived a simple life. Went to work every day. Came home on time. Kept a low profile. Someone no one suspected, but that man was not ordinary. The first bus arrived. Brakes hissed softly. The doors opened. No one stepped off. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Time began to stretch in an uncomfortable way. Inside the cars, heartbeats slowly rose. No one said it out loud, but they were all thinking the same thing. If today was not the day, if the information was wrong, if the man no longer took this bus, then everything could fall apart. 2 men stepped out of one car. They lifted the hood and leaned forward, pretending to check the engine. A simple performance, but a necessary one. In places like this, a single suspicious glance could ruin everything. Then headlights appeared again at the end of the road. The next bus rolled slowly into the stop. The doors opened. This time, 2 people stepped down. A woman and a man. In that moment, none of the 7 men had any doubt. The man walked slowly, his shoulders slightly hunched, the tired posture of a worker after a long shift. No one on the street looked at him twice. No one knew they had just passed one of the men responsible for the deaths of millions. That man had once sat behind a desk, signed documents, issued orders, organized trains filled with human beings, sent toward their deaths. He never pulled a trigger, never raised a knife, but he turned killing into an efficient system, cold, mechanical, without emotion. His name was Adolf Eichmann, and on that quiet night in Buenos Aires, after 15 years on the run, the past finally caught up with him. January 1942. Berlin was sinking into winter. The air was cold and dry. The surface of the lake lay perfectly still, reflecting a pale gray sky, hard and metallic. On the edge of the city, a luxurious villa stood apart from the outside world. Large windows, dark wooden interiors, a fireplace burning steadily, warm enough to make one forget that war was consuming all of Europe. Inside the meeting room, 15 men sat around a long table. They were neatly dressed, their voices calm, their expressions composed. No shouting, no pounding on the table, no visible emotion. This was not a gathering of fanatics. It was a meeting of educated men, men with degrees, with titles, with positions inside the machinery of power. 8 of them held doctoral degrees. On the table lay documents, files, maps, lists. There were no images of blood, no cries of pain, only numbers and administrative terms written neatly in black ink, precise and cold. They had come to discuss a plan already decided in principle, something the leadership referred to with a name that sounded almost harmless. The final solution to the Jewish question. Inside that warm room, the fate of millions of human beings was sealed in just over an hour. There were differing opinions, not about whether people should be killed, but about how. Who would be sent first? Who would be assigned to work? Who was no longer considered useful labor? Who would be dealt with last? The voices were steady, the arguments logical. Everything was presented like a large-scale management project. At the head of the table, one man listened closely. He was not the highest-ranking official in the room, but he was the one taking notes, the one organizing, the one turning ideas into plans that could be carried out. His name was Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann did not give long speeches. He did not need to persuade anyone. Everyone in the room already understood the objective. His role was to ensure that the objective would be implemented smoothly, efficiently, without error. He recorded every decision, every detail, every carefully chosen term, designed to avoid direct words like kill or exterminate. In their place were empty, emotionless phrases, wrapped in the language of bureaucracy: evacuation, special treatment, forced labor. Those words would later appear in thousands of documents, orders, and telegrams. They allowed both writers and readers to keep their distance from the true consequences of the decisions being made. Inside that room, no one saw the faces of those who would die. No one heard children crying. No one smelled the smoke from the crematoria. That distance was precisely what made everything easier. Eichmann understood this better than anyone. To him, this was not a moral issue. It was an organizational problem. How to move human beings from point A to point B in the largest numbers, in the shortest time, at the lowest cost. How to prevent the system from breaking down. How to make everything run like a machine. When the meeting ended, the men stood up. They adjusted their coats, shook hands. Some exchanged polite conversation before leaving the villa. Outside, the lake remained as calm as before. There was no sign that one of the most destructive decisions in human history had just been approved. As for Eichmann, he left the room carrying a stack of documents. From that moment on, his task was clear. Not to think, not to doubt, but to execute, cold, precise, without emotion. And from that peaceful lakeside villa, the road to the deaths of millions was formally laid out. Adolf Eichmann was not born into power. He was not a genius, not a leader, not a fiery fanatic. Eichmann's background was something millions of Germans at the time could recognize in themselves. An average student. He dropped out of high school, failed an apprenticeship in mechanical engineering. No outstanding achievements, no clear future, only a quiet, lingering feeling, the feeling of being left behind. In the chaos that followed the First World War, that feeling was common. But for Eichmann, it became an obsession. He wanted recognition. He wanted a place. He wanted to belong to something larger than himself. The Nazi Party appeared at exactly the right moment. They gave Eichmann what he had never had before: a uniform, a clear chain of command, a path for advancement, and above all, a sense of belonging. Eichmann did not need to think deeply. He only needed to perform the tasks assigned to him, and perform them well. At first, the work was small: paperwork, statistics, files, but it was there that Eichmann proved useful. He was careful, methodical, obsessed with order and procedure, qualities highly valued in a system that was rapidly expanding.
We
When the
strive
war
for
began,
efficiency and
Eichmann did not
punctuality
fight
on
on the
all
front
services.
lines. He stayed behind, in offices, surrounded by stacks of documents and maps. That was where Eichmann found his role. He did not speak about Jews with emotion. There was no personal hatred, no bursts of rage. Instead, there were dry discussions of transportation, allocation, efficiency. Human beings were reduced to units, to numbers, to data that needed to be processed. This is what philosophers and psychologists would later call the banality of evil. Eichmann did not see himself as a murderer. In his mind, he was merely a cog, an executor of orders, an efficient civil servant. But it was precisely this absence of reflection that made him terrifying. Eichmann did not need to hate his victims in order to destroy them. He only needed to stop seeing them as human. From his desk, Eichmann organized an entire system of death. He coordinated trains filled with elderly people, women, and children. He arranged schedules so that the trains arrived on time, did not overlap, and did not disrupt the broader machinery of war. When the death camps became overcrowded, Eichmann did not panic. He adjusted, optimized, increased capacity. The crematoria had to operate faster. The flow of people had to move more smoothly. Ashes had to be processed more efficiently. In internal reports, everything was reduced to neat figures. There were no screams, no blood, no visible suffering. For Eichmann, success was measured in efficiency. Each train that arrived on schedule was an achievement. Each problem solved was a step forward in his career. He climbed the ranks of power not through direct violence, but through absolute obedience and the ability to turn evil into administrative work. What shocked many people after the war was not Eichmann's face. It was his frightening normality. There were no signs of a monster, no wild eyes, no uncontrollable rage. Just a middle-aged man who spoke softly, used proper language, and repeatedly insisted that he had only done his duty. And yet, it was this very normality that allowed one of the most horrific genocides in history to unfold smoothly, systematically, and over many years. Eichmann did not create hatred, he created procedures. And when evil is packaged in forms, stamps, and signatures, it becomes easier to accept, easier to repeat, and far more dangerous. That is the cold lesson the world only fully understood after millions of lives had already disappeared. 1945. The war was over. The empire Adolf Eichmann had served collapsed in a matter of weeks. Flags were pulled down. Symbols of power vanished. Senior leaders were either dead, attempting suicide, or being hunted across Europe. For Eichmann, that moment brought no remorse. It brought only one thought: survival. He left his family behind. His wife and 3 sons were sent to relatives. No long goodbyes, no visible emotion. The cold separation mirrored the way he had once detached himself from millions of nameless victims. Eichmann put on the uniform of a low-ranking Air Force soldier. A calculated choice. No one paid attention to insignificant soldiers among the sea of chaotic prisoners of war. He introduced himself under a new name, Otto Henninger, a simple identity, suitable for a man who wanted to disappear. Not long after, he was captured by Allied forces. In the post-war prisoner camps, order existed mostly on paper. Too many prisoners, incomplete records, rushed interrogations. Eichmann understood this well. He answered briefly, humbly, always insisted that he had been nothing more than a small cog in the war machine. Then came a detail that nearly ended his escape. Under Eichmann's left arm was a tattoo, a large letter indicating blood type, a familiar mark of SS members. During the war, it could save a life. After the war, it became evidence. When it was discovered, Eichmann did not panic. He adjusted his strategy, immediately minimized his role, denied responsibility, turned himself into an insignificant nobody. And somehow, it worked. Instead of being sent before a military tribunal, Eichmann was transferred to labor camps. Simple work, sorting food supplies, stacking ammunition. Conditions were not especially harsh. There was food, there were cigarettes, there was time to think, but fear never left him. Eichmann knew that if even one person recognized him, everything would be over. Interrogations continued periodically. The names of SS officers were being exposed one by one. The net was tightening. He decided to run again. A nurse, either sympathetic or deceived, helped him secretly obtain civilian clothes. A farmer's shirt, a hunter's hat, an appearance ordinary enough to blend in with the masses of displaced people moving through post-war Germany. Eichmann slipped through the barbed wire fence at night. No gunfire, no alarms, only darkness and silence. He vanished. In the years that followed, Eichmann kept moving. Sometimes in northern Germany, sometimes in remote rural areas. He stayed nowhere long enough to attract attention. Each move came with a new name. Otto Eichmann, Otto Henninger, names worn like old coats. He worked as a lumberjack, cutting trees, carrying logs. Later he became a chicken farmer. A life so simple it was dull, but that dullness was the perfect disguise. To his neighbors, he was just a quiet man, hard-working, causing no trouble. No one knew that the man standing in a chicken yard each morning had once coordinated trains that carried human beings to their deaths. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, Eichmann could not escape his past. The fear of discovery was constant. Every unexpected knock at the door, every stranger appearing in the village, every newspaper mentioning war crimes trials unsettled him. He understood that Europe was no longer safe. The forensic traces still existed, records, signatures, transport orders. Documents he had once considered routine paperwork had become evidence of guilt. Eichmann needed somewhere farther away, a place where old names meant nothing, a place willing to look away from the past. And then, he saw the path leading out of Europe. From that moment on, Eichmann's flight was no longer temporary. It became a long-term plan, a deliberate disappearance. But no matter how many names he changed, no matter how many layers he put on, the truth followed him like a shadow. Slowly, silently, and without mercy. While Adolf Eichmann was doing everything he could to disappear, in Germany there was one man determined to do the opposite. He did not run from the past. He faced it every single day. His name was Fritz Bauer. Bauer was Jewish, a prosecutor, and a survivor. Before the war, he had been a young judge, known for powerful speeches defending democracy. That alone made him a target of the Nazi regime. In 1933, Bauer was arrested. He was imprisoned, interrogated, beaten. The months he spent in detention left scars that never faded on his body and on his mind. He survived only because he managed to leave Germany before the machinery of destruction reached its full force. After the war, Bauer returned, a new Germany in name. But beneath the surface, much remained unchanged. On paper, West Germany was a democracy.
I'm nobody important, I just do what I'm told.
But inside courtrooms, prosecutors' offices, and administrative buildings, familiar faces were still there. Many who had served the Nazi regime now wore the uniforms of civil servants again. They passed judgments. They signed decisions. They protected one another within a refined network of silence. Bauer saw it clearly. For him, going to work each day felt like entering enemy territory. He knew he was being watched, isolated, labeled a troublemaker. In a system eager to forget the past, Bauer was the man who refused to let it fade. But Bauer was not seeking revenge. He was seeking justice. To Bauer, justice was not emotion. It was responsibility. A duty to the dead and to the living. A promise that no crime, no matter how vast, could be buried by time or political convenience. Eichmann stood at the top of his list. Bauer understood that if he followed official channels, he would fail. Any formal request for investigation or extradition could be leaked, and with a single warning, Eichmann would vanish forever. He faced a brutal moral choice: obey the laws of a system not yet cleansed, or break them in service of true justice. Bauer chose the second path. He kept his actions secret. He did not inform his superiors. He opened no official file. Instead, he investigated on his own, quietly gathering information, listening to rumors, verifying even the smallest leads. When Bauer obtained information suggesting that Eichmann was hiding in Argentina, he knew he could not trust the German government. Not because he hated his country, but because he understood that the country was still not ready to face the truth. Bauer turned to Israel. It was not only a strategic decision, it was deeply personal. Israel was a refuge for countless survivors, a place where the memory of the Holocaust had never been allowed to fade. Bauer wagered everything: his career, his reputation, even his personal freedom. If discovered, he could lose his position, face prosecution, be branded a traitor. Bauer accepted that risk because he believed that there are moments when the law must be tested to protect the values it claims to serve. He told those close to him that a state governed by law only truly exists when it dares to prosecute those who once destroyed the rule of law. Bauer had no powerful team, no public support. He worked in silence behind cold office walls, carrying a constant sense of isolation. But he did not stop, because to Bauer, silence itself was a form of guilt. If no one spoke, if no one acted, then evil would win again, not through violence, but through forgetting. And from the determination of one solitary man, the wheels of justice began to turn once more. Slowly, dangerously, but irreversibly. The decision had been made, but the path ahead was anything but clear. Fritz Bauer had passed the information to Israel, but from that point on, everything became fragile. There were no documents, no official procedures, only trust, doubt, and an investigation that had to unfold in the shadows. In Israel, those assigned to the task understood exactly what was at stake. This was not merely an arrest. It was an action that could trigger a serious diplomatic crisis. A young nation, still struggling to secure its place on the international stage, could not afford recklessness. And then, doubts began to surface. The information from Argentina was imperfect. Witnesses were elderly. Memories were no longer sharp. Some agents traveled to Buenos Aires to verify the lead and returned discouraged. The house was too poor. The road too dusty. The man living there looked nothing like one of the most brutal architects of the 20th century. For a moment, the entire operation nearly collapsed. But Fritz Bauer did not believe in coincidence. When the official authorities in both Germany and Argentina simultaneously insisted that Adolf Eichmann could not possibly be in South America, Bauer immediately understood what was happening. Too many identical voices. Too many denials too quickly. That was not certainty. That was concealment. He knew he was right, and he continued to apply pressure, quietly but relentlessly. Eventually, Israel decided to take one more step. The agents returned to Argentina. This time, they were not searching for villas or signs of power. They observed daily life, habits, routines, the small details that only someone in hiding would display. The man known as Ricardo Clement lived a remarkably simple life. He went to work every day at a factory, left at the same hour, took the same bus, walked the same stretch of road home. A routine so regular it felt mechanical. That very regularity drew attention. They followed him from a distance. No contact, no questions, only observation. They noted his gait, his posture, how he reacted to strangers, how he kept his distance, how he avoided eye contact, small signs, but familiar to anyone who had hunted a man on the run. Then they saw the family, a woman, children, ages that matched chillingly with the records Bauer had provided. A family gathering, an anniversary. The number of years of marriage aligned with unsettling precision. The picture began to come together. Photographs were taken discreetly, compared, analyzed. Though the face had aged, though time had softened many features, the proportions of the body and the patterns of movement remained. For the agents, certainty did not come from a single detail. It came from the fact that all the pieces fit. The final decision was made. They would seize him. No arrest warrant. No assistance from local authorities. No room for error. 7 men were chosen for the mission. Nearly all of them had lost family members in the Holocaust. For them, this was not just an assignment. It was a confrontation with personal history. They knew Eichmann took the bus to work. They knew the route. They knew the schedule. They knew he might be armed, and they knew that a single scream could end everything. That night, Buenos Aires was as quiet as ever. 2 cars were parked along the road, the distance carefully calculated. Engines off, lights out, everything in place. When Eichmann stepped off the bus, he had no idea that 15 years on the run had come to an end. One agent stepped forward and spoke a single sentence in Spanish, just enough to make Eichmann turn his head. In that instant, they moved. 2 bodies fell into the roadside ditch. Dirt flew. Breathing turned sharp and fast. No gunshots, no loud cries, only a brief violent struggle. In less than a minute, it was over. Eichmann was restrained, blindfolded, forced into the back seat of the car. The door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled away, melting into the night as if nothing had happened. No one on that road knew they had just witnessed one of the most significant captures of the 20th century. And from that moment on, history began to shift, not with gunfire, but with patience, resolve, and a silence that had lasted for years. The safe house was so quiet that each breath could be heard. Adolf Eichmann sat there, tightly bound, his eyes covered. There was no violent panic on his face. Only a restrained tension, as if he still believed he could control the situation with words. He spoke first. "My name is Ricardo Clement." The voice was steady, confident, a name he had used for many years, a shell that had protected him for far too long. The agents did not argue. They did not need to raise their voices or make threats. For them, truth did not come from emotion. It came from detail. They began with measurements: height, arm length, head circumference, the distances between key points of the facial bones. Every number was recorded carefully. Compared against old files, documents preserved for years. Numbers do not lie. Time had changed many things, but the structure of the body remained. Familiar proportions emerged, cold and precise. Eichmann sensed it. His patience began to wear thin, yet he held to the same story. Still Ricardo Clement, an ordinary factory worker. An anonymous man. Then they asked him to remove his shirt. Under his left arm, where an SS blood-type tattoo should have been, there was only a faint scar, wrinkled skin, the trace of a crude intervention. Eichmann seized on that detail immediately. He said the tattoo had been removed long ago, that it proved he no longer had anything to do with the past. But the scar itself said the opposite. An innocent man has no reason to erase an identifying mark. Only someone in hiding tries to scrub history from his own body. The agents continued. They asked about his past, about the years after the war. Eichmann changed his story. Now he said he was Otto Henninger. Another name, another disguise. They let him talk. The more he spoke, the tighter he bound himself to old details. Then came the final step. One agent opened a file and read aloud a sequence of numbers. He read them incorrectly on purpose. A slight error, subtle enough that only someone who truly knew would notice. It was an SS identification number. Eichmann did not think. He did not hesitate. The reaction came before reason. "No," he said. "The correct number is different." In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. Nothing more needed to be said. No argument. No additional proof. Only someone who had lived with that number for years could correct it instinctively. Eichmann fell silent. The confidence drained away. His shoulders sagged. As if, in that instant, the weight of 15 years on the run finally pressed down on him. No more Ricardo Clement. No more Otto Henninger. Only Adolf Eichmann. The agents looked at one another. There was no celebration. No sense of victory. Only a cold acknowledgement that history had caught up with this man. In that small room there was no courtroom. No audience. But there was truth. Bare, undeniable. And for Eichmann, it was the first moment since the end of the war when there was nowhere left to hide. The identity had been stripped away. The past had returned, and this time it would not let go. Capturing Adolf Eichmann was only half the journey. The other half was even more dangerous. Removing him from Argentina without an official extradition order could ignite a serious diplomatic crisis. A sovereign nation violated. A suspect taken unlawfully. On the international political chessboard, it was a move filled with risk. Israel was still a young country. Every diplomatic relationship mattered. One mistake could lead to isolation, but if they hesitated, Eichmann could be rescued or disappear once again. There was no safe option left. The plan had to be flawless. A special flight was arranged. Israel's national airline would send a delegation to Buenos Aires for Argentina's Independence Day celebrations. Everything appeared legitimate, diplomatic, ceremonial, smiles and handshakes. Behind that facade was a covert mission. Eichmann was kept in a sealed room for several days. No windows. No clock. Time was erased. He knew that each passing hour could be his last on Argentine soil. On the day of action, the agents put on airline crew uniforms. They spoke louder than usual, laughed, played their roles as men who had drunk too much at a diplomatic reception. Eichmann was given sedatives. Not enough to render him unconscious, but enough to make his steps unsteady, his gaze unfocused. He was dressed in a crew uniform, appearing like a drunk colleague being supported by others. At the airport, everything unfolded at a suffocating pace. Every glance from security staff made hearts beat faster. Every harmless question carried the potential to destroy the entire plan. Yet it was normality that became their ally. The guards saw a noisy group of flight attendants, laughing, helping a drunken coworker along. A familiar sight, not suspicious, not worth closer inspection. A polite smile, a casual wave through, and they passed. Eichmann was taken onto the plane, first class by the window. A doctor sat beside him, pretending to care for an exhausted colleague. No one in the cabin knew that the silent man with his head lowered had once been an architect of mass death. When the aircraft doors closed, no one dared to breathe deeply. The engines roared. The wheels rolled along the runway. That moment stretched endlessly. One stop order. One phone call, one last-minute suspicion. Everything would end in disaster. Then the plane lifted off. The city of Buenos Aires shrank beneath the clouds. Borders lost their meaning. Argentine airspace fell behind. Inside the cabin, a voice came over the intercom, low and steady. Adolf Eichmann is on this flight. He is on his way to Israel to stand trial. There was no applause, no celebration, only heavy silence. For the agents, the mission was not yet complete. But they knew that from the instant the wheels left the ground, history had turned a page. After 15 years on the run, the man who believed he had escaped his past was finally being brought back to face it. And this time, there was no turning back. Jerusalem, 1 year after the capture. The city was no louder than usual, but the atmosphere was different. People felt it in the way they walked, in conversations that broke off mid-sentence, in the long silences before radio sets. The trial was about to begin. Inside the courtroom, Adolf Eichmann sat inside a glass booth. His face was thin, thick glasses, the appearance of a middle-aged man who seemed entirely unremarkable. Without prior knowledge, no one would guess that this man stood behind the deaths of millions. That ordinariness unsettled many. When the prosecutor rose, the room fell silent, not out of fear, but from the weight of the moment. He did not speak in anger. He did not raise his voice. His opening words carried the gravity of history. He said that when he stood before the court that day, he did not stand alone. With him stood 6 million invisible prosecutors. People who had died, who could not speak, could not point, could not demand justice. Yet they were present in every charge, in every document placed before the court. Eichmann listened. No clear emotion. He took notes, occasionally adjusted his glasses, an image many found difficult to accept. How could a man so calm be connected to crimes of such scale? Then the witnesses began to appear. They were not lawyers, not scholars. They were survivors. An elderly man, his voice trembling, spoke of being driven along roads lined with corpses. A gaunt woman described her child being torn from her arms on a train platform. Another witness recalled being forced to kneel, forbidden to look up, forbidden to see, knowing that a glance could mean a beating or a bullet. No one in the courtroom could remain untouched. These were not abstract accounts. They were living memories, wounds that had never healed. Each testimony was a cut, forcing listeners to face what many had wished to forget. Inside the glass booth, Eichmann's demeanor did not change. When it was his turn, he spoke in an even tone. He denied personal responsibility, said he had only followed orders, that he had no power to decide, that the system itself was the true culprit. It was an argument the world had heard before. But this time it did not hold. Prosecutors presented documents, signed orders, meeting minutes, telegrams, dry lines of text carrying deadly consequences. Eichmann's signature appeared again and again. Not the signature of a passive figure, but of an active one. A man who pushed forward. A man who challenged superiors when the pace of killing slowed. With each document read aloud, another crack appeared in Eichmann's wall of denial. He began to repeat himself, saying he had no malicious intent, that he had never killed anyone with his own hands. That responsibility belonged to the system. But this court was not judging feelings. It was judging actions. And Eichmann's actions were recorded in meticulous detail in the very paperwork he once considered routine administration. Outside the courtroom, the world watched. Through radio, through newspapers, through evening broadcasts. Many people heard, for the first time, how the machinery of genocide truly worked. Not through images of battlefields, but through the voices of those who had survived. The trial was not only about judging one man. It became a moment for humanity to examine itself. To ask how evil could be legalized. How ordinary people could participate in extraordinary crimes. When each day of testimony ended, no one left the courtroom feeling relieved. Because even as justice was slowly taking shape, what had been lost could never be restored. Inside the glass booth, Adolf Eichmann remained seated. Surrounded by evidence, by memory, by accusations that could not be erased. And for the first time, he was no longer facing lifeless numbers, but the true consequences of the decisions he had made. before the public, before history. The day of the final verdict arrived in heavy silence. The courtroom was full, yet there was no sense of triumph. No cheers. No one rose to applaud. Everyone understood that no sentence could ever compensate for what had been lost. The court found Adolf Eichmann guilty on most counts. Crimes against humanity. War crimes. Crimes against the Jewish people. The verdict was read slowly, sentence by sentence, word by word, as if language itself needed time to bear the weight of what had just been affirmed. Eichmann stood there and listened. His face remained calm. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Until the very end, he clung to the belief that he had been nothing more than a civil servant following orders. But the court did not accept that. Because if evil could be excused by obedience alone, then no society would ever be safe. Eichmann's final night came quietly. No public audience. No cameras. No bright lights. The execution took place in darkness, as if history itself refused to turn the moment into a spectacle. When it was over, his body was cremated. The ashes were taken out to sea and scattered in international waters. No grave. No headstone. No place of remembrance or devotion. A deliberate choice. The name Adolf Eichmann would belong to no land. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Fritz Bauer returned quietly to his everyday life. No grand honors. No monuments. No spotlight. He continued his work. Continued pushing other investigations forward. Continued confronting a system still filled with shadows. Bauer understood that bringing Eichmann to justice was only one step. Not an ending. Not a complete victory. Just a reminder that truth can be buried, but it cannot be erased. He died a few years later. Only after his death did the world begin to fully recognize his crucial role in Eichmann's capture. Many realized, too late, that without one determined individual willing to risk his career and personal safety, history might have taken a very different path. This story is not only about a criminal being punished. It is a story about responsibility, about how every person, no matter their position, has a choice. The choice to obey, or the choice to stand up. The choice to remain silent, or the choice to speak. Evil does not always appear with the face of a monster. Sometimes it looks like ordinary people working in offices, signing papers, following procedures. And for that reason, the opposite of evil is not always a grand hero. Sometimes it is simply someone who refuses to look away. When the story ends, what remains is not the image of Eichmann, but a question for all of us. If history repeats itself, where will we stand? Among the silent crowd, or with those who dare to say that this is wrong?